Hey friends, I have these fond memories as a young man, working with a friend as we referenced this handy grease-stained Haynes manual in my car. It was a fun, 5-speed stick shift, very peppy car to drive, and not too difficult to repair. On this one particular day, we had removed and disassembled the carburetor to give it a good cleaning. Over these long hours as we tinkered, I vividly remember listening to an old, dusty shortwave radio that sat on top of the nearby workbench. It was quite magical, really, that the airwaves contained all this music and talk shows and sermons years before the advent of online podcasts like this one and YouTube. Back then, the secret to listening to shortwave radio was finding the right frequency, and once you dialed into it, you could hear the station's broadcast literally from all over the world. If we're going to be able to stay the course, just like operating a shortwave radio, we have to learn and tune into the frequency of our own emotions and the emotions of others. Emotions? Now, for those of you that are thinking now, I wasn't born with emotional intelligence. Don't worry, scholars and practitioners alike argue that it's less a trait you're born with, and it's more of a skill to be learned and to be formed and developed. In fact, recent articles declare that emotional intelligence is one of the top leadership powers of the day. I agree. In all my years of leadership, I am more convinced than ever that we cannot experience resilience without it. Now, maybe you're thinking I'm more task-oriented and I don't feel comfortable navigating my emotions, much less those around me. Or maybe you've been labeled by others as an overly emotional person and you struggle to kind of contain your emotions appropriately. Friends, make no mistake, the more we grow to understand and regulate our own emotions, the more we can discover vital clues and insights for understanding the emotions that we lead and that are under our care. And the more we understand the emotions of those that we lead and are under our care, the better we can guide and shepherd ourselves while leading others to a shared, God-ordained destination. Even when the stakes are high, the pressure's on, and the risks are real. In the next few minutes, I want us to explore 3 key principles of emotional intelligence. First, the call to identify, interpret, and regulate your own emotions. Second, to skillfully understand and guide others' emotions. And then third, out of that combination, fostering empathy, calm, and non-anxious presence with those we work with. These 3 principles put into practice can help you and your team build trust, stay cohesive, and remain steadfast despite the noise, the craziness, and the chaos that's happening all around us. First, identify, interpret, and regulate your own emotions. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you did a personal emotional audit? This is where we recall major life events and connect them with significant emotions we may have felt after these memorable experiences. For example, when I think about placing my faith in Christ at a young age, I can clearly remember feelings of remorse for my sin that just overwhelmed me. And this led me to tears as I prayed with my mom to receive Jesus' forgiveness. And then this flood of amazing peace came over me. I also think about the next best day of my life, my wedding day. I was filled with so much love, elation, delight when Debbie and I exchanged our vows, and then later made our way to the just married getaway car through a sea of bubbles blown by family and friends and loved ones. I don't want us to shy away also from the difficult emotions and memories either. I also remember feelings of deep sadness during times of loss and anger in the face of injustice, times of frustration when I was trying to learn something new and impatiently trying to master it too quickly. Next, we also have to learn to interpret our emotions. In other words, we have to ask ourselves, why am I feeling this way? Why is this conversation making me so uncomfortable? Where did these unexpected tears come from? Or why am I laughing so uncontrollably? Why do I feel so ecstatic, excited, or happy? Or why do I feel fearful or angry, anxious, or depressed? Hardship and suffering can force us to reflect on our emotions in new and deeper ways. Emotional intelligence helps us to be more resilient, but it often surfaces in places of loss, brokenness, trials and tests and difficulties that compel us to confront our deepest fears and feelings. To be attuned to our emotive reality, we must also learn to manage and regulate our emotions, where we bring them under the Spirit's control. This involves being open to the full range of feelings, knowing when to engage and disengage from these emotions, and reflectively monitoring and regulating them as we work toward specific goals and walk by the Spirit. For example, most of us know that expressing negative emotions of anger and frustration can take one of two paths, either toward a healthy, productive outcome or an unhealthy and a destructive one. How do we learn to walk in the Spirit while expressing those difficult emotions? Not only must you identify, interpret, and regulate your emotions, second, define resilience, you must also skillfully understand and guide the emotions of others. It's not just about me. It's about those that God has called me to shepherd and lead. When was the last time you audited not just your own emotions, but your team's or your colleagues or your family members' emotions? Some people have a special gift for reading the emotions of others almost intuitively, whether they're navigating family dynamics at the Thanksgiving dinner table or in an executive boardroom, or navigating high-stakes employee reviews. But for most of us, this is a skill that has to be learned and honed. It's all too easy to misread people's emotions or to project our own feelings on others. Growth over time with evaluated experience is paramount to cultivate interpersonal maturity and relational nuance. Saul is a classic example of a leader that was unable to recognize loyalty as he perceived David as a threat despite David's efforts to convince him otherwise. Saul, in the Old Testament's emotional volatility, his insecurity and fears clouded his judgment. And while granted there were other factors in God's plan, David was an asset to Saul, but Saul just couldn't see it. In contrast, the Psalms are full of equally emotional expression: anger, joy, sorrow, pain. But they are brought in trust to a God who knows, who sees, who cares, and who can handle all of these emotions and help us to regulate them well. So back to understanding others' emotions. This goes beyond merely naming them. As a leader, you must guide others' feelings toward shared outcomes and goals. Emotionally intelligent individuals are proficient in expressing their feelings and can direct them in a healthy and productive way to facilitate thought, solve problems, and even lead change. Okay, this is a lot, but this is what's documented in the literature. The successful ability to monitor and manage relationships with others influences and develops people, communicates visions, manages conflict, provides leadership, catalyzes change, enhances group cohesion, and promotes collaboration. I think another aspect that is vital is guiding others' sentiments to strategically direct and manage emotionally volatile situations, relationships, or impulses. The story is told of Ronald Reagan being rushed into surgery after the assassination attempt in March 1981. As the news broke out, the nation and those in the operating room were filled with great distress and fear. It was told that as he entered the operating room, he joked to the doctors, "I sure hope you all are Republicans." Here we see Reagan's example of using humor to diffuse the tension in the room. He reframed fear with calm confidence, putting those in charge of his critical crisis moment at ease. Friends, appropriate humor can regulate not just your emotions, but everyone else as well. A few questions to consider as you audit your ability to rightly perceive and guide others in their emotions could include, what is the dominant emotion for each group member? What are my group or family members' greatest fears, hopes, and needs? Or how can I provide a safe place for those around me to express emotion productively? But there's a third and final principle. When we blend these things together, lastly, you must foster empathy, calm, and non-anxious presence. Just like Reagan, leaders who are self-aware understand and manage their own emotions and can better understand others' emotions and express profound empathy, maintain internal calm, and project a non-anxious presence that builds a culture and a team of resilience. Here, regulation of our own emotions is important because it frees us up to be able to enter the emotive world of others, to walk in their shoes, to feel what they feel, to see what they see. It's in this place we're able to infuse our own internal peace, providing an abiding, non-anxious presence. A couple of years ago, our church underwent a significant pastoral leadership transition. As elders, we had to process our emotions and empathize with the congregation's sense of loss and new beginnings, learning to trust God in new ways for a new season, while providing non-anxious presence to help build and forge resilience during this time of transition. And I love seeing these godly men put into practice emotional attunement as they helped many in the congregation process a whole mix of feelings. Finally, I can't help but think of Ecclesiastes chapter 3, and specifically verses 1 and verse 4, which reads, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven." Verse 4, "A time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance." Friends, emotions are a natural part of life and leadership, and emotional intelligence that leads to resilience is guided by these three principles of, first, identifying and interpreting and regulating your own emotions. Second, skillfully understanding and guiding the emotions of others. And third, bringing this all together to foster empathy, calm, and a consistent, steady, non-anxious presence. These three principles put into practice can catapult you and your team to a new level of resilience by God's grace and God's power.